Stuart, just to check that you are actually in, can you just show yourself and speak, and Betty as well?
I'm here.
Perfect.
I'm here, ready to go.
Perfect. I just took a photo. I just took a photograph. I'm gonna save it as well. All right. All right. I'm gonna start presenting one. You can stay if you like, as with your video on. I'm going to present. Betty, can you see my presentation here?
Yes.
Perfect. Okay. All right. So thank you, everyone who's attending the conference. This is the last leg of the afternoon part of the conference. We have still 4 excellent sessions this afternoon after the keynote. Finance and insurance and licensing for space launch, as well as the market analysis of the small satellite. Plus, we have a short presentation that we got from the Mexican Space Agency yesterday evening in the chat session for 5 minutes towards the end. And I want to thank, first of all, Surrey Satellites and Leaf Space and New Space Capital for sponsoring 3 of the panels of the conference. Thank you very much for your sponsorship. We are running this conference free of charge on a non-for-profit basis, so this is for us helpful to recover costs. And the Space Alliance team, executive team, is here on the slide. Betty is the founder of the ACCESS.SPACE Alliance, came out with the idea a couple of years ago, and then myself and Christian joined in, taking over and helping her in running the Space Alliance. And the Space Alliance, in fact, is a non-for-profit association, as I said earlier, for new space in the small satellite sector globally from around the world. It's not only UK, although we are based in the UK. We have, in fact, 50 more companies from all over the world who are now members, space agencies as well, and universities. We on the website we have terms and conditions with how you can join us as well, and what it means to join us. Since January 2021, we started actually charging fees, very small amount of fees, I have to say, just to help us in running the alliance. So we have also offices in the UK, France, and Germany, and also we have a colleague, Alexander Mensik, helping us from Belgium as well, who's also a part of the alliance. We have put together committees, Free Space Optical Communications, Regulatory and Space Policy, a Lunar Deployment Committee, as well as Finance recently. We'll soon have others coming on board. If you need more information, just write to myself or just info@access.space to give you more details on the committees as well joining the alliance. Today, I counted about 63 different countries from all over the world. Of course, many Europeans. As you can see, the United Kingdom is a lot of registrations. I have to say that although we have 587 or 590 registration, at any point in time, depending on the panel, we have approximately about 120 attending, which is a good number. And in terms of the geographical distribution, it's basically mostly Europeans, but a lot of Americans and Asia Pacific, of course, Middle East and Africa. It just depends on the time of the day. So we put in a morning session today to capture the sort of Asia Pacific, Middle Eastern, also African counterparts of the geography. And this afternoon, of course, we're getting now at the very early morning breakfast for the United States, and those colleagues are coming on board. Excellent. So I'm going to pass on the floor to Betty, who's the director, one of the 3 directors and founder of the ACCESS.SPACE Alliance, and I'm going to now keep quiet.
Thank you very much for your introduction, Tony. I think it's fantastic, and I would like. I'm very pleased to introduce now Stuart Martin, because Catapult, satellite application Catapult, has been a great supporter of the activities since the inception of the organization, and therefore it's a double the pleasure to welcome you, not only as a very knowledgeable person to that discussion, but also as a great supporter of what we're doing. If I may introduce you, Stuart, you're the CEO of the satellite applications Catapult. You joined the Catapult in January 2013 from Logica, which is now part of CGI, where you led all the company's activities into the space domain for 7 years. Stuart, you're the former Vice Chair of UK Space, the British Trade Association representing the space industry, and a council member of Eurospace, the European equivalent. You're non-executive director of Free Catapult spin-out company, a member of the advisory board of Seraphim Space Venture Capital Fund, and you sit on the UK Space Leadership Council, the top-level cross-industry, academia and government stakeholder group responsible for overseeing and delivering the UK space policy. If you're a passionate advocate for the Catapult program, which you consider as a vital element of the UK strategy to secure and accelerate the economic growth for emerging technologies. So you'll have to tell us more about that, is what the emerging technologies are. Furthermore, for the satellite applications, you believe the UK is well on its way to securing a world-leading position, making the UK the place to be if you want to do business in space. So thank you very much, Stuart. The floor is yours, and I can't wait for all the exciting presentations that you can bring. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Betty, for that very nice and comprehensive introduction. And thank you both to you and for Tony for the invitation to address the audience today. It really is my pleasure to be here at this, what I think is a really exciting conference. This afternoon, we're going to be talking about regulation, financing, and public-private partnerships. So I thought what I'd try and do a little bit with the few minutes I have is talk through some of my experiences in these areas and why I think they're such a fundamental part of the innovation landscape that is perhaps underappreciated, and where I think there are some real opportunities to do more to support innovation, particularly in the space sector where this is so important. So I'm going to start actually by talking about a role I did a few years ago, back in the days when I had a proper job. As Betty was just saying, I worked for a company called Logica, now CGI, and we were one of the lead partners on a bid for a thing called the Galileo concession process. Many of you will remember this process. It was well publicized, and it was quite prominent for a number of years. But the idea was that a private company was going to take responsibility for building out the full Galileo satellite navigation system once the system had been demonstrated with a small number of test satellites. And then it would run Galileo as a commercial venture, generating revenues, covering costs, and providing a dividend back to the initial public sector investors as well. And so there was a competitive process that was called the Galileo session, established to do that. The partner on the private side was a thing called the Galileo Joint Undertaking. Again, many of you remember that, which was another partnership between the European Commission and ESA. Now, the way that this worked was that there were 3 bidders at the stage that I was involved, and each of us would be invited to Brussels for 1 day a week. So we each trotted out to Brussels for on consecutive days every week for a period of about 6 months for a process of what was described as competitive dialogue. And we had this dialogue with each consortium with the Galileo Joint Undertaking. And I think the interesting thing was, certainly from my perspective, was that the whole dialogue was organized around risk, all the different risks associated with rolling the system out, deploying the services, generating the revenues, and how this was going to be accomplished once the concession contract was put in place. And so, and then the joint, the GJU, the Galileo Joint Undertaking, would use this competitive dialogue in order to select the winning concessionaire who would deliver the best value back to the original public founders. So this dialogue in risk, it was it was partitioned into three main areas. We covered all the risks in the system, of course, which we all know very well, but it was partitioned into three main areas. The technology. Will the technology itself work? Will Galileo deliver the type of services that it is specified to deliver? The market, if the technology works, will there be a market? And if you remember that one of the key fundamental assumptions here is that Galileo was going to displace GPS, or at least enough of GPS so that it could generate a revenue stream on its own. So there was a clear market imperative there for the system to work. And execution, so the business execution. What were the risks around the concessionaire completing the build out of the constellation, putting the products into the hands of users, and actually making the system actually work? Would they be able to deliver against the business plan that they were proposing? So these were the three separate areas of risk. Now, the interesting thing here is that the technology risk, which is one that we often talk about in innovation programs, that was already being delivered by the European Space Agency. They already had contracts in place with industry to deliver the first test satellites and to validate those satellites against a set of requirements. So actually, the technology risk was already largely dealt with. And so that was not part of the concession contract. The last part, the third risk, is the execution risk. And actually, the main driver for getting a private sector partner involved in this is because the private sector, I think most people recognize, are better at delivering commercial services than the public sector. So that's it. That was pretty little debate around that. The execution risk sat with the private sector partner, the concessionaire. So that meant that all the conversation, these 6 months of weekly dialogues, was almost all focused on the market risk. And clearly, you want the private sector to be motivated to maximize the market potential. That was one of the objectives of the system. So it needs to be invested in the market risk. Yet it was the public sector, the European Commission through the ESA, who had specified the system. And also, it's the public sector who had its hands on some of the crucial levers of the regulation, and to what extent the service would be taken up by public sector users. So so actually finding the way of balancing that market risk and partitioning up the market risk between the concessionaire and the public sector stakeholders was where most of that that discussion was focused. Anyway, that could be a subject all by itself. But the main point I wanted to make here is that there was no question that this was a complete, a really innovative business. Nothing like this had ever been attempted before at the European scale, but we didn't talk about technology at all. So it was from that point of view, I think it was certainly in my experience, it was pretty unique for an innovation business where the technology was not part of what you were trying to resolve. I think that's interesting, because I think so often in dialogues between public and private sector around innovation and technology, that's where we sometimes go wrong. We equate innovation with technology, and we forget all the other elements of risk that are actually going to be so important in whether this venture that is fundamentally based on technology is going to be successful. And I think that's why this afternoon session is going to be so important. And I can actually make a comparison with pharmaceuticals. Certainly in the UK, the space sector is often compared with pharmaceuticals because that's seen as another high value, high innovation sector. But actually, when you look at the technology, the market execution risks, that they are really quite different. In pharmaceuticals, the market is very well understood. It's clear where there are market demand. It's clear where there's need for new therapies, and it's clear what the opportunity is going to be to pay for new therapies once they get developed. It's also the execution is very different. That there's a lot of experience in pharmaceutical industry around scaling up and delivering new therapies. So there's a lot of confidence that if they're able to develop a new technology, they will be able to take it to market and they will be able to execute on business plans. So I think that makes that sector maybe slightly more able to absorb more technology risk, because the market and the execution risks are that much better handled. On space, on the other hand, if you look at space, whenever we're bringing a new space product to market, we are almost always either creating a completely new market or disrupting an existing market. Both of those are fraught with risk. Also, the execution, we are delivering space infrastructure into the most hostile environment you can imagine. It's very costly. And there's still not much track record of companies delivering innovative new services into that environment. So the execution risk is pretty high. And actually that combination means sometimes it's harder for the private sector to take on a larger amount of the technology risk when you've still got those market and execution risks to manage as well. And that's true for all major disruptive innovations, by the way, where the rewards are highest. If you're developing a product which has disruptive capability or requires a disruption of the market to be successful, and by definition, there's no track record of doing that before. So there's going to be it's going to be a much bigger ask to actually fund all the technology risk and all of that as well. So what is the lesson from that? So I think it's really important that we think about innovation risk in these three terms: that's technology, market, and execution. Private sector is very good at taking market risk and execution risk if the technology risk is low or has some mitigation. And in fact, that's the world of venture capital. They're really good at sort of taking market and technology risk. If you ask venture capitals, they want to know there's a market opportunity, and they want to have confidence in the team that's going to deliver against that market opportunity. They can do the execution, and they look to seek mitigation for technology risk. And that's where organizations like the Space Agency and ourselves, we can offer support there. Private sector is also very capable of investing in high-risk technology development if the market and the execution risks are very low. And that's the example that we saw from pharmaceuticals and other sort of incremental technology evolutions. The challenge comes when all three risks are very high, as is often the case for space. And I think we'll perhaps hear a little bit more about that in the financing session this afternoon. So if we want to encourage more private sector investment in high-risk space R&D, it is probably not enough to provide a bit of match funding, which tends to be the model we try and encourage, or we have tried to encourage in the UK. You need also for government to play a role in reducing the corresponding market and execution risks. And for me, this was the really exciting thing about the UK's investment in the OneWeb. It was recognition of the role that government can play in mitigating market and execution risk, even in an environment where actually, in this particular case, maybe the technology risk wasn't so high. And I think this is something we don't talk enough about when we're talking about stimulating innovation. And I think this is the opportunity of our discussion this afternoon, as regulation and PPPs are so critical to this. Moving to regulation then, I think very often, particularly in this country, in the UK, we tend to think of regulation as a means to protect the government and consumers from the ravages of capitalism. It's there as part of the checks and balances to make sure that capitalism doesn't go too far. I think this is clearly important, and there's a role for that, but we must also recognise that good regulation can also enable government and consumers to maximise their benefit from innovation, whereas bad regulation stifles innovation. An example that was told to me, which I think captures this beautifully, is in the energy sector. At the moment, the way that we deliver energy to consumers is regulated by the Ofgem, and the way that they do it is that they set a price limit to the price you're allowed to charge per unit of energy in any household. And this is great. It sort of means that there's a maximum that any household will pay per unit of energy that they deliver in their house. But we also know that we want to reduce the amount of energy that householders use. And we need more innovation in this system, in the energy system more generally, to encourage more efficient use of energy. But if somebody wanted to, for example, offer energy in a different way, for example, they wanted to offer instead of unit price of energy, they wanted to offer to maintain your house or 5 rooms of your house at 20 degrees centigrade all throughout the year. And it would be their responsibility to deliver the energy that it took to maintain that. then they would have an incentive actually to reduce the amount of energy that they used. And maybe it made sense, over time to invest more in insulation by the energy companies, and the consumer would get the benefit from, having that investment and, using less energy. But obviously in that situation, the energy provider would be charging a lot more per unit than the regulator currently allows. So actually that sort of innovation is currently prohibited just because of the way the regulator works. And I think that's a great example of how energy how regulation can act as a disabler rather than an enabler. And that's what we want. We want good regulation. And industry wants regulation. And well-structured regulation can unlock markets, and it can simplify execution. It can also confer competitive advantage on the international stage, opening up international markets, and that's so important for all our space companies. So our sessions this afternoon on launch insurance and licensing, financing small space, and the broader role of public-private partnerships come at a vital time as we await our new national space and innovation strategies here in the UK. And I'm really looking forward to seeing what new insights into all of that they can uncover. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Stuart. I think you've brought a very interesting light into all these aspects, and you tackled the issue of risk, which is actually one of the most important elements into enabling or preventing the development of space. In addition to the assessment of risks, there are two aspects which I would like your view. One is that you can work at it with the impact the risk has and the probability of occurrence. So we looked at it from the various types of risks, but there is a second aspect in terms of impacts, and some risks have more impacts than others. So how do you see that the mechanism of looking at risk could be addressing that, and then the mutual relationship, if you want, that can have a cascading impact one on the other?
Yeah, I mean, and that's one of the challenges that we have, is that you're sort of moving into sort of the insurance territory here, aren't you? And so we are in a potentially a high risk sector. I think however much we work to reduce the probability of risks occurring, and I think we're getting better and better at that all the time. I think launch success rates are going up and up all the time, but nonetheless, the risks of a catastrophic failure during a launch or during any other high risk maneuver are still very high. But we need a way of spreading that risk more broadly, so that if something catastrophic does happen, they don't all sit in one place. They're actually shared more evenly. And I think this is the challenge of the insurance model that we need to develop, which the government role in that is all important, because I think the government needs to recognise that particularly whilst the market and the technology is not yet mature, and the reality is that it isn't, the government has to play a role in an insurer of last resort to enable that business to reach that level of maturity.
Thank you very much. I think it's a very, very exciting and interesting discussion. I would really like to carry on discussing now, but I know that Tony has a hard stop to prepare for the next panel coming up. So thank you very much for your intervention, Stuart. Tony, how do you want to work for the next session now? Thank you. Thank you again.
I'd love a nice sandwich right now, but thank you so much, Stuart, for coming on board at the last minute. It was great to have you here, and also the whole team of Space Application Catapult. You are one of the biggest, let's say, contributors to the ACCESS.SPACE Alliance with your membership, and we hope to see you and your team back in our meetings and also other webinars and the future conferences. Thank you. All the best.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye.